Hey everyone, welcome back to another Fatty Hacker gaming video. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently this time. Instead of my usual tier lists and reviews where I provide thoughts on games I've played recently, I'm going to be reflecting on every game I played before my tier list series started. With each game, I'll share thoughts on how it shaped me as a gamer and if it was memorable enough to still recommend today. I think this is important as a reviewer because it's impossible to be completely objective since people have varying preferences. However, I do believe we can have viewers informed on our bias so that they can get valuable recommendations and entertainment regardless. Of course, another great reason to be making this is that on each video I get many comments asking which games I've played and suggesting new ones. With this video complete, in combination with my annual tier lists, you dear viewer will know every game I've ever played. I hope together we can reminisce about games from the early 2000s into the 2010s and maybe give you an opportunity to dive into the past and try out an older classic. And to be clear, this is by no means a definitive ranking of the quality for these games, just their lasting impact on me as a player. And lastly, before we jump in, I wanted to issue a warning for video quality in the early years. Finding footage for games in the early 2000s proved to be quite tricky, and the majority of trailers I could find were very low resolution, even when posted as first-party content by the game developers themselves. Stick with me, shield your eyes, and appreciate how far we've come in real time as the quality improves. In the early years, we'll be taking a look at my experiences with games up until around age 9. This includes a mix of handheld consoles, browser games, watching others play, and showing up at my friend's place to try what they owned. I definitely did not hit the ground running as an extreme gamer in my early youth, but these experiences laid the foundation for how my preferences would later develop. My earliest memory of video games that I can think of is watching my dad play Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I was probably only 6 years old, and I'm extremely appreciative that this was my introduction to the medium of video games. The cartridge came with a physical map, and my dad's copy was covered with notes and markings on certain puzzles and items. This, along with the game's emphasis on open-ended exploration, non-linear progression, and challenging dungeons, cemented in my mind that games could be more than just mindless fun. They can present you with challenges that force you to think. To this day, when I play games, I am constantly drawn towards uncovering every secret, checking every path, grinding until I'm over-leveled for the boss, and metaphorically slashing through every blade of grass to reveal hidden rupees. Its music was of course absolutely fantastic, and listening to the perfected 8-bit melodies fills me with nostalgia. When you reach a certain point in the game, the world can flip to a dark version, and I remember thinking that was just the coolest thing. Admittedly, I've never played it all the way through myself because I was too young and later pulled to the flashy new thing, so I can't comment too deeply on the game's systems and features outside of my memory. However, I do know that to me the pixel art is timeless, and many game news sources and players recommend it to this day. Because it's the first game I remember in my life, and because its systems ingrained a sense of curiosity in game worlds that have never faded, I have to put it in the formative tier. The first game that I really got into myself was Pokemon, and when I say I got into these, I was not messing around. Fully completing the Pokedex, battling every trainer, and one summer even working with my brother to spam soft resets until we got a shiny starter. Spending so much time on creature collector style games early on made me addicted to this power fantasy of battling with minions that has never quite gone away. As I write this, I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3 and am building towards a Necromancer. When Pal World came out, no matter how rough it was around the edges, the simple creature collector loop had me instantly addicted. Maybe it was just because I was young, but early Pokemon games actually felt like you had to prepare for the fights. Whether that meant farming wild creatures in the grass until you learned the right moveset for your starter, or intentionally securing some new party members that were strong against the next gym's element type. Slowly leveling your Pokemon, seeing them evolve, and crafting a perfect team to challenge the Elite Four is vivid in my mind. I'll never forget my first max level Pokemon either, a Blastoise from Pokemon Leaf Green. As I grew older, I played Emerald, Diamond, Heart Gold, White, and finally X. Preparation for the fight and building the perfect team are feelings that are with me to this day, and for that reason, Pokemon Go's informative. Next, I'll quickly touch on browser-based PC games I started getting into around 8 or 9 years old, Club Penguin and Runescape. These were neat because you could play them anywhere with a computer. Visiting a friend, extra time at the library, computer time at school, many opportunities to jump into these games and get used to playing on a desktop for the first time. Another first was that there were many social aspects for me to explore. I can recall visiting other people's igloos in Club Penguin, or learning tricks from others on how to perfect the fishing minigame. And in RuneScape, getting scammed by strangers taught me some harsh life lessons about overly trusting. RuneScape's MMORPG elements of farming levels also trained me to grind with absolute tunnel vision. I will chop trees until I level up like nothing else matters. While these games are undoubtedly clear in my mind, I feel as though I maybe could have just as easily played other similar multiplayer browser style games and had comparable experiences. For that reason, they're both going in memorable. At the end of 2008, I got Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon for my DS, and it absolutely transformed me into a tactical, turn-based commander. This game features permadeath for the characters you control and takes over 20 hours to beat, which means different runs can play out entirely differently gameplay-wise depending on who makes it to the end. Now, when games are released, we have instant access to wikis, build guides, and subreddits at our fingertips, which help us optimize our playthroughs and know which characters are worth developing. Back then, every character evolution or unique story moment was a surprise that had to be learned. Currently, when I play games, it's very much a one and done experience because the market is so saturated that I'm overwhelmed with options and want to make sure I try as much as I can. As a child with no job, I didn't get as many games each year, which turned almost everything into a roguelike unintentionally. After I would beat the game and get an ending I wasn't happy with, or had too many characters die on me, I would simply restart and carry forward everything I'd learned until I could secure a perfect run. The first time I ever pulled an all-nighter at a sleepover, my friend and I were both grinding Shadow Dragon until the sun came up, thinking it was the coolest thing. For me, it's going into impactful. To close out my early years of gaming before a proper TV console, there was one I didn't even own, but could not get enough of, and that was Rise of Nations. A friend of mine owned this in grade 3, and I would ask to go to his place constantly, to the point that I vividly remember the layout of his basement as though it were my own. It's a real-time strategy game where you develop your civilization and army in a match that could easily take over an hour to complete. I think what made it so compelling to me was the parallel levels of strategy and room for seemingly limitless optimization. If you've played an RTS before, you likely know that there are stages to the game. Early on, you're gathering resources to establish your engine. Maybe mid-game, you start to poke and explore the map to prepare for combat. Late game is inevitably when the war wages. But what if someone rushes to develop a couple soldiers as quickly as possible and send them at you instantly? If you don't have any defenses of your own, you could lose in minutes. There are so many ways to play and decisions to make that outcomes can be so unique and interesting. Also, watching your horses turn into tanks as your research level progresses from one time period to the next was immensely satisfying every time. Gaining the knowledge that some soldiers are weak early on, but turn into strong vehicle units meant you could produce many of them and keep them hidden while you rush on your research development. With all that said, these days I shockingly play basically no RTS games. I love the idea of them, but there's such a time sink and commitment that I select for other types of games instead. Because of that, I'll be putting it down as minor influence. In this era, I got a Wii for Christmas, and a couple years later, permission was granted to use my dad's PS3. The volume of new games starts to ramp and doesn't let up, so we're gonna move through them a little bit quicker. At 9 years old, my brother and I got our first real console, the Nintendo Wii. Aside from, of course, many hours spent on Wii Sports, we gravitated to party games pretty quickly. We played the entire campaign for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, raced to complete every circuit on Mario Kart, and enjoyed both with friends and family anytime they came to visit. Not much to say on these. I look back on them fondly, they were fun, but I think interchangeable for me. With improved sequels, there isn't much reason to revisit them, and I never got super into fighting games or racing games, so not a strong lasting impact. However, I think culturally and socially their presence is undeniable. In the past 3 months, I have played both Mario Kart and Smash Bros at social gatherings. While far from being the best player in the room, I'm usually at least competitive thanks to my time with these games when I was young, and for those reasons, they'll both go into memorable. In grade 4, I met a friend who had Diablo 2 and my life changed. Despite playing this game 8 years after it was released, to me it was unbelievably novel, unlike anything I had played before. It was my first time playing a proper RPG where I could choose a class and skills completely different from my friend, meaning we play the same game in very separate ways. Not only that, but cooperatively our abilities could synergize in a way I hadn't experienced before. This was over 15 years ago, and yet I vividly remember when we strategized that I would play a necromancer and focus on high summon quantity while he plays a paladin with thorns. Thorns is an aura that causes enemies to inflict damage onto themselves when they attack you, and since I had so many minions, they were constantly losing chunks of HP before they could reach us. Being able to creatively express a playstyle like this was fantastic, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. At lunch, we'd talk about everything we were going to do that evening, and then we'd hang out in person on 2 computers side by side to get it done. Diablo 2's style was also a change up for me. It was a gothic dark fantasy, dripping in grimy pixels and covered in blood. I loved exploring this world where all these environments and designs were so new to me. Having a loot chase was another wonderfully new addition to my life. Something that has absolutely never left me is that I will always enjoy grinding in my games. Farming a boss 20 times to get that one sweet low drop chance gem to increase my crit by 2% will unfortunately always be satisfying to me, and I believe that Diablo 2 played a strong role in shaping that desire. Not only that, but I am forever drawn towards builds and video games that allow me to play a summoning role. The power fantasy of having minions that attack on my behalf while I merely conduct my army is so satisfying. Before I had even started reflecting on my time with Diablo 2, I knew where it would end up, right into formative. Okay, moving quickly again, next up was Super Mario Galaxy at probably around age 10 or 11. Absolute banger, obviously. The gravity mechanic of running around entire planets was incredibly fresh and fun to play. When Nintendo is operating at their best, the density of mechanics is top of the industry and makes puzzle platformers that feel fantastic. Certain level design is still etched into my mind, like the Bowser boss fights and the Bee environment. I think this is probably still one you can enjoy today, although it didn't quite set me down a path of loving all things Nintendo or playing a ton of puzzle platformers. So, not to knock its quality at all, I'll be placing it solidly into memorable. StarCraft 2 got popular when I was in grade 5, and since it was free to play and easy to run, we would always rush to install it on the school computers during our free time and play together. Having enjoyed Rise of Nations previously, it felt familiar, but the strong identity of each race you can play and the sci-fi alien theme set it apart. I was fixated on the idea that each faction specialized in a style of play that felt so different, yet the game was still well balanced, despite that. Racing to production with dozens of little Zerg aliens, or fortifying slowly with Protoss machines could vastly alter your experience with a match. And that was an exciting novel concept to me. But despite looking back fondly, I didn't go on to carry forward much of what this game offers with me as my preferences developed. So, minor influence it will go. Besides sneaking away to play Diablo unbeknownst to my parents, the Resistance games were the first M-rated violent video games that I experienced. My mother firmly held the belief that violent video games would make children more aggressive, and because of this situation, my dad would wait for her to leave the house, and then we would play the Resistance campaign in split-screen co-op. Of course, I thought it was super awesome, and the tabooness of it made it all the more intense to play. You fight Chimera, which are these grotesque alien mutant hybrids that I found genuinely scary. Unique creatures and boss fights still are vivid in my mind around 15 years later. This was the first FPS series I played, and also the first time experiencing a very linear design structure, both very notable qualities. I was also invested in the story a great deal. Playing it with family on the big screen gave it a cinematic quality since we could discuss the narrative as it unfolded over several nights of play. Growing up with PlayStations meant that this series was effectively my Halo, and while I don't think I've heard anyone mention this series in a long time, for me it absolutely sparked a course for many more first-person shooters and story-driven campaign video games to come. So it'll be going into impactful. Next, I played Infamous in early 2011. Going back to catalog these is quite funny because of how out of sync I was with the actual release times. Not being online or immersed in the culture of games meant that my main source of new experiences was going to a physical game store and buying cheap used discs. Anyways, I remember playing this and thinking it was fun, but nothing beyond that, so it'll go into replaceable. Later that year, I picked up Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, which do stand out strongly. That combat style has now been done over and over in third-person action games, especially the superhero genre, but at the time it was really fresh and I couldn't get enough. Battle scale was especially memorable, since you would fight dozens of grunts with a handful of unique melee animations, watching Batman just fly across the screen. I was a huge Batman fan in general at the time, reading lots of the comics, so my appreciation of the game world was enhanced and reinforced by this series. It's a meme, but from gliding around buildings, beating up an iconic cast of villains, and solving detective cases, this game really did make you feel like Batman. I don't know if you could still recommend this game today, because as great as it was, I feel the more ambitious and gamey a video game is, the worse it often ages, since each unique mechanic has been polished and improved on in the following generations. I'm feeling memorable tier for this one. When I started grade 7, video games became more prominent in my social circle, and playing online with friends after school from our own homes was starting to be a common activity. At the same time, I was starting to spend more time online, increasing my awareness of the community surrounding video games. I was watching Let's Plays for the first time, seeing game trailers, and getting excited for their releases. To start off this era, I got into Minecraft. A sandbox survival style game like this was a new first. It was an infinite world with no clear objective, and the options seemed limitless. I recall strip mining for hours, overjoyed to find diamonds. Some days I would just go into creative and see if I could recreate designs of Pokemon as pixel art, because I could. However, amongst all these fresh experiences, two elements stuck with me the most. Creating your own adventures by exploring the world for hours with no clear map home, and the addictive progression as you increment through different stages of items or abilities. When games capture this feeling, I'm often pulled in quite strongly. Setting sail or sprinting through rolling hills without knowing what awaits you, especially with a group of friends, is timeless. Similarly, I am a complete sucker for progression systems that reward you with small, consistent boosts of power as you grind away. There is a reason why people joke about the yearly Minecraft server. The same urge hits me too. That early feeling of pure exploration coupled with the dopamine as your tools jump from wood to stone, then iron and beyond is reliably enjoyable. And since it's so easy to add mods, texture packs, and create your own unique bases, the ability to create content is endless. I enjoyed watching Let's Plays nearly as much as the game itself early on, and each felt like it had its own story since the goal of the players were different. Easy, formative ranking. Finally, into my first proper online multiplayer game. The first game that made me buy a microphone so I could actually talk to other people through party chat and game chat. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. I mentioned earlier my mom's apprehension to allow me access to violent video games, but by grade 7 the social pressure was too high and the restrictions were gone. This became my filler game. Every spare moment I had was time to jump online and hone my skills. Your kill death ratio was like a representation of social status in my friend group, and mine was negative, so there was no time to rest. The layouts of these maps are etched into my mind. The feeling of an ACR headshot never leaving me. And despite enjoying many different game modes like domination and classic team deathmatch, what easily took up most of my time and earned the most enjoyment was Infected, a ridiculous mode where one player starts with nothing but a throwing knife and melee, yet as they land kills, others become infected until the last person alive wins. It was asymmetric anarchy at its finest, throwing knife bank shots, body blocks, and map exploits, creating unbelievable unique moments and entertainment. Since my first Call of Duty, I've spent thousands more hours in online PvP games, and I believe the path was set so strongly because of my positive experience with Modern Warfare 3, so it's going informative for sure. I played a handful of other Call of Duty games in the future as well, and particularly enjoyed going for Easter egg challenges and zombies. I won't give them each their own sections since my experiences kind of blend together between them. Next up is Portal 2. I saw my cousin playing this and thought it looked cool, so I picked it up for the PS3 to play co-op with my dad. Fantastic masterpiece, holds up to this day. I've played it several times with different people, and its puzzle design impresses me every time. I don't play a ton of strict puzzle games, but I do have an immense appreciation for the designers, even more so in a multiplayer format where you have to balance the flow of information. This, I believe, would aid in priming me to enjoy co-op games that have a bit more substance to them in terms of mechanics, like a Raid in Destiny or the We Were Here series. For those reasons, it'll go into impactful. Injustice: Gods Among Us was my introduction to one-on-one fighting games, and also the only one on this list. I loved superheroes at the time, this game was popular, and it made for an easy couch multiplayer experience when friends came over. Despite really enjoying the campaign, I tried playing online once and got absolutely destroyed. The skill ceiling in fighting games when you learn every niche strategy, meta characters, and frame-perfect tech becomes a bit ridiculous, which was an uninviting atmosphere to want to continue beyond that point. For me, it was replaceable. Later that year, I had a friend recommend Assassin's Creed to me and suggested I start with number 2. I thought the parkour was really enjoyable, and the design of the cities for free running still stands out. It's set in late 1400s Italy, and I hadn't played a game in a setting like that before, in regards to both the time period and the geographical location. Storytelling was also a unique fusion of historical fiction and sci-fi, since the gameplay mostly sees you in the body of an assassin during the aforementioned place and time, yet you are really just a modern day man using a virtual reality machine to access the memories of your ancestors. A pretty neat concept still today. However, by the time I played this, there were already several other entries in the series which scared me away from committing. In addition to that, there were other games on my mind that were about to change my life. I never got super into Assassin's Creed games, or even Ubisoft games in general, but I can still clearly recall the gameplay, so I'll put it into minor influence. A game came out in November of 2011 that absolutely possessed me. Despite not playing it for several months until I got it on my birthday, I couldn't get enough. To me, the allure of Skyrim was the open-ended nature of the combat and build style, where each player could create their own method of play. I watched videos of Nords playing as knights, Khajiit as assassins, but most importantly, I studied mages. My dreams were filled with anticipation of joining the College of Winterhold to study magic. When I did get my hands on the game at last, it was an overwhelmingly large play space that pulled me in so many directions, and I absolutely loved it. Getting lost in sprawling dungeons, trading with merchants from small towns, fighting dragons, buying homes, it felt like a limitless sandbox of fantasy adventure. Despite loving the game and playing the hell out of it, I did fall victim to the meme of not ever actually beating the main story. This can be seen as a weakness maybe for the game, or my methods, but I see it as a strength to the gameplay and the world that you can play hundreds of hours easily without getting bored of even the side content. Skyrim is still popular to this day for a good reason, and I'm sure you can find 100 video essays out there going into ridiculous depth, so I'll stop here. For the most prominent personal impact it had on me is a love of the fantasy genre and a gravitation towards mage playstyles in nearly every game I play. It set a high bar for open world RPGs, left me with vivid memories, and changed the way I want to play games. So of course, it's going into formative. What is your favorite video game? It's a very difficult question to answer because different games can have different purposes. Is it a game you love to hate that you begrudgingly can't stop grinding, like Overwatch or Destiny? A short masterpiece that despite just playing for 10 hours and completing, you will never forget. Maybe one where you have the most fond memories of playing with your friends. For me, it's impossible to answer with full confidence, as I would love to get more granular, but if I'm pushed, I will say Bioshock Infinite. Let's get into why. Up until I turned 14, sure I had played some games with stories like Resistance or Arkham City, but at most, the best best praise I could give that was that they reminded me of movies, almost as good. Bioshock Infinite was the first time I felt like this medium of storytelling had surpassed most movies I'd seen, and not just succeeding in spite of its format, but leaning into its strengths and being fantastic because of them. Similarly, the world of Columbia was unlike anything I'd seen. Again, settings from other games were enjoyable and well done, but familiar. In Diablo, based on the setting, I knew to expect catacombs, swamps, and everything that came with a hellish gothic world. With Columbia, it was an absolute dreamlike joy to explore and uncover its secrets. The game's introduction, pulling you from the dim, wet lighthouse and shooting you into the clouds, is one of the strongest, most memorable openers in gaming history. Its music and art make you feel frozen in an old classic time of America, yet the technology around you defies that feeling at the same time. Playing it also felt great, as it combined a collection of distinct guns dedicated for your right hand with unique powers in your left, taking the best of both traditional FPS elements and making you feel like a supernatural being at the same time. This really opened the door for more tactical decision making in approaching combat, and also made me super invested in finding every possible upgrade I could. I remember after beating the game, I bought a physical strategy guide for the first time that included detailed information on the world, but also revealed any extra things I had missed tucked away in the corners. It's usually easy for me to scrutinize games and see at least a few flaws in the whole package, but with Bioshock, it felt so well-rounded in every aspect. Great environment art, music, voice acting, characters, story, setting, and combat. But again, above all else to me is truly the detail and richness of this world and its narrative. The setting is deeply affected by your actions during the course of the game, and how it connects with the DLC and other games in the series is absolutely masterful. It is surprising, thrilling, sad, and exciting, with fantastic mysteries and reveals layered throughout. Just a couple years ago, I had my girlfriend play it, and 10 years after its release, the game still won her over as a favorite as well. I can easily recommend this game to people today, and the way it made me feel filled me with a desire to chase down more gems like it. Bioshock Infinite will easily go into formative. From age 15 to 18, I played around 28 games, which I will be calling the consumer golden age, because I was basically playing anything the AAA industry would put out. So let's speed things up for real this time, while keeping in mind that the length of the section does not necessarily correlate to its importance. When Destiny came out in September of 2014, it was far from a perfect package, and yet it covered so many aspects of what I looked for and enjoyed previously that it quickly became my main game that would stay with me on and off, but mostly on for the next 10 years. It featured fantastic first-person gameplay, combining creative weaponry with space magic abilities, open areas to explore and look for secrets, PvP modes to face off against other players, campaign missions to work through a narrative, loot to grind for, and most importantly, above all else, were the raids. There's a lot of room to criticize much of what Destiny has to offer, and I've done so myself, yet I firmly believe that raids in Destiny are the absolute pinnacle of cooperative gaming. To start from an art perspective, they have some of the most memorable environments and cinematic soundtracks from any play space I've ever experienced. Combat challenge is real, and you have to stay on top of your surroundings for threats, but then layering in the mechanics demanded of you and your 6-player fire team brought the intensity to another level. Perfecting your communication, rotations, and DPS cycles felt like you and your friends were transforming into a well-oiled machine of destruction, capable of toppling gods. I've spoken more about Destiny in other videos on my channel, so feel free to check those out if you're interested, but unfortunately, I don't think there's ever been a worse time to get into the game. Between Destiny 1 and 2 across console and PC, I have over 4,000 hours, making it easily my most played franchise of all time by a wide margin. I won't mention it again in this video, but if a Destiny expansion came out, you can safely assume I played it. While I wouldn't take away my time raiding with friends or anything else, grinding every last grimoire point was time I believe I could have spent better, perhaps experiencing other games along the way. It's these thoughts that made me shift towards variety, away from these forever games, and starting the tier list series in an effort to stomp out some classics I had missed in my backlog. But yeah, this game is obviously formative, and the looter shooter formula became such a parasite in my brain that I played nearly every Destiny clone for years, even embarrassingly pre-ordering Anthem. To earn the right from my parents to play Grand Theft Auto 5, I made a PowerPoint presentation on the benefits of video games on children. It contained slides highlighting activities such as the golfing minigame, online racing, and anything I could possibly throw in there to distract from the campaign heavily centering around committing acts of crime. Somehow I pulled it off, and of course this game is an absolutely wonderfully crafted banger. Switching protagonists to live the lives of 3 very different people at any time and learn their story, genius. The spectacle of the heists, thrilling. But what I think Rockstar does better than maybe any studio is the level level of detail in the world and the sandbox. It's things like the behavior of the NPCs sharing the road with you, the smart and consistent satire of the city elements like companies and branding, or fully immersive and wacky fake radio stations and TV shows. Combine that with the different feel of each car, crazy ragdoll physics, and highly interactive pedestrians, it's just so much damn fun to cause chaos and live in this city. Some of my earliest videos on YouTube are unlisted montages of blowing things up in GTA 5. Every time the studio releases a game, it basically redefines the industry standard in all categories of game making. It taught me the new heights that can be reached, and also left strong memories in both single-player storytelling, open-world sandbox, and online play with friends. However, I didn't go back to play all the other games in the series or become overly invested into urban open-world style games or crime narratives. So for that, I'll place it in impactful. I was late to the party in early 2015 when I played The Last of Us Remastered on PS4. I know I just said that Rockstar raises the bar with each new game, but for Naughty Dog, it seems true as well, but with a greater emphasis on linear movie-like qualities instead of open-world mastery. This game came out 12 years ago, and I quickly checked out the cinematics to see how they hold up today. Obviously, we've improved to new heights, but there are still games coming out now that The Last of Us 1 surpasses in the quality of character acting, believability of animation, and overall directing and writing. And while survival-style action horror stealth gameplay is not my personal favorite way to play, it undeniably adds new creative elements and polish with each entry in the series. The creature design for the zombies is great, each type having such a strong distinct personality and behavior to it, with the overarching aspect of fungus and mycology adding a unique flavor to the world and biology. Sound design for enemies like the clickers is so memorable that when I heard the noise in the sequel or even the show, I immediately tensed up. And I made this comment for Bioshock Infinite, but this is a game where the story surpasses most of the narratives told in traditional media. I was deeply affected emotionally, invested in the story, and my role to play in it. Philosophical debate and discussions on morality are very fascinating to me, since humans can range from being certain of absolute divine truth on right or wrong, down to pure utility-driven outcomes. The Last of Us provides very interesting plot points that twist the way you feel and question those thoughts. Its environment art, and especially the lighting, is as beautiful as a post-apocalyptic world can be. After playing and enjoying this game so much, I became more firmly a Sony fanboy, ready to pre-order any new release coming my way. It also reinforced the belief that video games can reach cinematic heights when done well. I can't imagine not having played The Last of Us. Impactful. Going off the purchase history of my PSN account, 2015 continued to be absolutely packed, and next up was Dying Light. While the details of the story are barely present in my mind by now, this game was underrated purely for the fun factor. Slicing through the undead with combinations of creative weapons led to visceral meaty combat, and the first-person parkour felt super smooth. Even more so than Assassin's Creed, it forever left a spot in my heart for games with great movement. Memorable. Another game I found to be tragically underrated was Evolve. The concept was centered on an asymmetric PvP experience where 4 specialized hunters faced off against one monster that continues to gain power as the match progresses. It was incredibly unique at the time, and what struck me was how well balanced it was despite a myriad of factors that could have gone out of control. There were several playable monsters that each felt very unique, over a dozen maps to stage the hunt, and each hunter had a unique role to play based on their kit. I thought it was equally fun in both roles and really enjoyed my time with it. Although I didn't put tons of time into it, these core concepts actually left a surprisingly strong impact on me that I don't think could have been easily replaced by another game in its spot. Memorable for sure. Then The Witcher came out and consumed me for over 100 hours. Nothing had scratched that itch of open world fantasy RPGs since Skyrim, and not only did it complete that task, it surpassed it in many ways. In Skyrim, your character is a shell for you to fill with your own ambitions, whereas Geralt from The Witcher comes along with a rich history and a strong purpose. Being a Witcher means you are a monster hunter with mutations and extensive training to aid this perilous occupation. Yet you are also swept into a story of grand fantasy and deep relationships. This was my first time playing a game with branching options that affect the story, as well as multiple choices for romantic partners. Naturally, choosing between Triss and Yennefer was one of the hardest decisions in my life as a 16-year-old boy. But beyond larger changes to the story, it was the smaller and morally ambiguous outcomes that really stuck with me, as making the world feel so responsive to my actions and as a consequence more immersive. There's a side quest where you find a man chained to a rock, left to die a brutal death. He begs you to free him and claims that he is being wrongfully punished by villagers that are cruel and unjust. If you investigate the village, you will hear from many people that he did commit a murder. And so now, with the limited information you have, it's time to choose whether he should be left on the rock to die or freed, potentially to go on and commit more crimes. With no hard evidence yourself, there's not a real easy answer to this. Another interesting example is a quest where you must investigate a serial killer targeting women in Novigrad. Partway through the mission steps, you confront a suspect and it feels like you've got it under wraps. You can have Geralt kill him, and the quest will end as though you have have solved the case. However, later in the game, the murders in Novigrad continue, making it clear that you made a mistake that cannot be undone. A gut-wrenching feeling that most games don't have the confidence to let the player make, and it could have been avoided had you spared the suspect and investigated further. The mission structure and combat design for hunting monsters also really sold the experience of being a Witcher. Often things start with investigating a scene and using your enhanced senses to track the footprints, trails of blood, and various indications of a beast nearby. Once the species is identified, this can drastically change your approach, since every creature will have unique weaknesses, like the types of oil for your weapons and magic. How seriously you take the prep phase will have a huge impact on how easy the main fight will be, which can be a beautiful mix of spells and swordplay. I've gone on too long on specific examples here, so I'll quickly mention a couple more standout aspects. The exploration is fantastic, and dense environmental storytelling pulls you off the beaten path constantly to investigate points of interest. Lastly, The Witcher somehow managed to sneak in a card game so addicting that I sometimes forgot I was playing a third-person action game outside of my turns of Gwent. I didn't realize it then, but this planted the seed for my attention to be drawn towards other card games in the future. I had played open-world fantasy RPGs before, but the attention to detail in this world, the side quests, the meaningful choices, introduction to card games, and immersive combat loop earned a spot in Impactful. Luckily, Grow Home was free on PlayStation in September of 2015, otherwise I would have completely overlooked it. In this physics-heavy climbing game, the runtime is just about 2 hours, and the goal is laser-focused: keep going up. The only game I had played in the last 6 years that wasn't focused on realistic graphics and an ambitious high-budget experience was Minecraft, which made Grow Home an absolute breath of fresh air that rocked my world and taught me how enjoyable a simple concept done well could be. It showed me that a game made by 8 people that you could complete in one night after school could have just as much staying power in your mind as a 40-hour game from a team of 200. Even though it was technically made by Ubisoft, it was part of a branch focused on smaller experimental projects, so effectively I view it as an indie adjacent. It was relaxing, enjoyable, the core loop of climbing felt unique and satisfying. Importantly as well, it did not overstay its welcome. I wasn't as scrutinous back then, but now I value my time more preciously and believe that every part of a game should have a strong reason to exist or be cut. If a 30-hour game could do the same thing in 20, then it should have been 20. In a sea of blockbuster games, Grow Home was one that went against the grain for me and kept these sorts of experiences from drifting completely out of my consideration. Impactful. My memories on the timeline were too fuzzy to include precise mentions of it previously, but growing up around ages 8 to 12, I would occasionally sit to watch my dad playing the Uncharted series. So when the remastered collection of numbers 1 to 3 came out on PS4, I was eager to relive a complete playthrough myself. By now I'd experienced a handful of simple linear narrative action adventure games, yet a few things still stand out from Uncharted. To start, the action set pieces were very cinematic and memorable, super dynamic with lots of movement like an escape sequence on jet skis, fighting through a moving train, or even gliding between pieces of cargo as you fall from a plane. The climbing and puzzles, while simple for the most part, were also a nice way to break up the pacing, since you would bounce between 20 minutes of combat, 10 minutes of climbing, a short puzzle, then back to another fight. The variety kept the gameplay from getting too stale. Finally, the writing for dialogue was great and made the cast of characters super likable. There was a strong focus on dialogue during gameplay, and moments where Nathan and Sully exchange banter during exploration in the jungle can be just as entertaining as the actual cutscenes. This was also a series I had played the most entries from, aside from maybe less narrative-focused titles like Pokemon. I remembered watching these characters from my childhood for years, and now I got to experience it all for myself and anticipate the sequel as well. It felt like a small personal coming-of-age moment, or a passing of the torch from my dad to me, as though it was my responsibility to finish Nathan Drake's series now that he is retired from video games. For me, definitely memorable. Next up, with my friends, we went through a small period of playing Star Wars Battlefront. I liked Star Wars, but I was never a huge fan, so there were no free bonus points to be earned from me on the familiarity with the brand. The positives were that the game looked and sounded fantastic, a mix of vehicles into combat made for large spectacle, and powering up into iconic characters was a cool power fantasy. However, gone were the days of just wanting to play PvP for the sake of it. After so much time with Destiny, I was now addicted to progression and wanted more depth in my systems. Without steady progression to be made, goals in sight, and a ton of content to experience, I lost interest rather quickly. I imagine nearly any other multiplayer game could have filled this spot, and for me, not much would have changed, making it replaceable. I hadn't played any Fallout games until number 4, since when the last entry came out, I was barely starting to dip my toes into shooters, much closer to still having spent time with Mario Galaxy instead. However, Skyrim left me as a Bethesda fan excited for their next release. At this point, the DNA of open world RPGs were inherently enjoyable to me. If a game let me level up as I explored, that was enough to keep me playing. The design of the world in this post-apocalyptic landscape has a lot of character to it, and the unique charm and quirks were fun to experience for the first time. Allowing heavy customization on weaponry was another enjoyable game system worth putting time into. However, unfortunately for me, this game just didn't fully click. A big part of combat is VATS, where you slow time, choose a target, and have the game shoot for you. In hindsight, nothing objectively wrong with this, but coming from games with mostly exclusive real-time combat, this departure was foreign and less fun to me. While the world was interesting, I have a strong personal preference for other genres. The RPG expression for skills was also underwhelming. In Skyrim, I could be a mage casting fire tornadoes against yetis in a frozen mystical mountain, or a knight fighting off a dragon to defend a noble city. That player fantasy compared to the choice of using a shotgun to kill a mutated dog in a broken city, or a sniper to kill a scorpion in a different broken city, just doesn't really compare to me. To be fair, the Deathclaws are pretty iconic creatures, but for the most part, I had been spoiled with my previous experiences. The side quests and themes weren't as interesting to me as The Witcher, the combat nothing too special either. I don't look back on Fallout 4 as being bad by any means, but I don't spend any time fondly reminiscing over my time playing it or recommending it to others in the modern day. I didn't go back to play other Fallout games as well, and I didn't even play their next big single player game, Starfield. To me, this was unfortunately replaceable. My introduction to tactical shooters was with Rainbow Six Siege at the very end of 2015. I have a ton of respect for this game and the audience it has been able to maintain for a decade, as it defies the odds of most live service games and keeps on surviving. It's a great premise with well-designed operators that each provide a fun and unique role to play on the team. I love the strategy and teamwork behind it, since synergizing your abilities with friends, holding each other's angles, and generally just working together leads to better outcomes. There was a great deal of skill in learning the maps and recognizing key utilities in their counters. Map destruction also led to emergent gameplay, which was super exciting. However, at this point, my preferred time to kill and way to play PvP was far too cemented to ever fully break the mold. In Destiny, the PvP is basically an arena shooter with fast-paced movement, medium time to kill, and near instant respawns. It trained me to be aggressive, mobile, and that losing the first shot doesn't mean a loss, as you can recover from a bad position with abilities or better aim as the duel continues. Quick play also featured very little downtime, since the maps were packed and you could die, spawn, and be back in a fight 10 seconds later. Comparing this to Siege, where a game could play out as follows: 30 seconds to pick your operator, 45 seconds to prep your defenses. You hold an angle for a minute of the 3-minute round. You are one-shot killed by an angle you didn't see, then spend the following 2 minutes dead spectating your team. Having fewer encounters and drawn-out phases of preparation increases the intensity of every exchange and give weight to each tactical decision. While I really appreciate that and can still have fun playing it with friends, my PvP brain is too rotted to fully enjoy this style of game, and I just see it as way too much downtime compared to the action. However, the aspects I do like in this game, which are the different operator kits and tactical teamwork, would undoubtedly influence my desire to give more attention to hero shooters in the future. It wasn't a perfect fit for me, but it was unique enough to be memorable. The Division was one of the first notable examples in mind as a Destiny-like, where a popular console game launched that was a shared world shooter, having players repeat short missions to level into a preferred build and, most importantly, chase loot. Its similarities were enough to draw me in, but its differences are what kept me playing. I enjoyed the change to a realistic, grounded setting, third-person cover-based action, and most importantly, the Dark Zone. Game modes almost always fall into the category of player versus environment or player versus player. To this day, I thoroughly enjoy both types of gameplay, and the Dark Zone in the Division was my first experience with a hybrid PvPvE mode that would later become much more common as extraction shooters gained popularity. The best gear in the game was in this area, making it very enticing to step out of your comfort zone. Entering the Dark Zone was a seamless experience, since it was a section of the map gated off and clearly labeled. You step through a decontamination zone, and suddenly a new set of rules apply. In these environments, the social dynamics it enables is one of the most interesting things, and I talk about this at length in my section on Arc Raiders from last year's tier list video. Working out who is friend or foe makes for very memorable moments. Interestingly, as I reflect on this, I realized that I liked the Dark Zone so much because it existed within the context of a larger game with other options. Pure extraction shooters don't really click with me because I always get the feeling of what's the point, since everything is so unstructured and you can lose it all in any run. In my cautious, loot-hungry mind, the incentives are completely backwards. Yet, if I know it's a short, exciting risk that has upside crossover to other more interesting missions I do care about, that context immediately changes everything for me. A memorable game for sure. With the Uncharted Remastered Collection complete, I was ready for the release of Uncharted 4. I have nothing much interesting to say that hasn't already been said in my reviews from the previous entries, and Naughty Dog as a whole in the Last of Us part as well. When I played this game, it was the best looking, most cinematic game I'd played once again. The semi-open exploration areas were a nice improvement that leaned into the adventure side of the game, while keeping things still on the rails enough to have the story always moving forward. In general, it also felt like a more mature, grounded, and polished entry, which was fitting for the conclusion. It definitely felt like the success from The Last Last of Us was influencing the game direction here. Fantastic game, but as far as personal impact, a bit lower, just because it didn't do much different that I hadn't already seen in both The Last of Us and Uncharted series before it, so minor influence it will go. When Overwatch released, I was awakened to how well hero shooters meshed with what I love most in video games. Typically, my experience in PvP was that everyone more or less has a very similar power level, weapons, and abilities. In Siege, of course, this was a bit more varied and introduced interesting counterplay, but at the end of the day, a player with a good gun who had great aim and game sense could hard carry a team regardless of their operator matchup. Overwatch was the first time seeing a distinction for each character with so much depth that you essentially had to learn the game over every time you started playing a new hero. This by itself led to a ton of replayability and entertainment, since choosing the role of damage, tank, or support had such varied experiences in gameplay. Feeling out which styles of play were most enjoyable to me was a novel discovery, but above all else, it was that macro, tactical teamwork and coordination that made me feel like I was doing a player versus player raid. We needed to know our positions, strengths, weaknesses. I quickly took on the role of tank and was very active with communication, realizing how easy it was to swing a game by simply calling out a target for my team to shoot at together. Encouraging a teammate to swap heroes when they were hard countered could be just as effective. And the arena style combat fit way better with my taste. Fights were long, respawns were quick, and then you were back into the action. Another massive incentive to play and shift in my interests for gaming was the competitive playlist. In most PvP games, I was playing just for the fun of it, chasing cosmetics like a golden gun skin in Call of Duty, or better loot in Destiny. Overwatch was the first time that rank was the chase, and having a trackable number representing my skill level in the game was extremely measurable and satisfying. Not to mention addicting, since losing 20 SR made me want nothing more than to gain it back. This was also my introduction to live stream content, as my desire to improve drove me to study the decision making of better players and mimic that. The fumble of Overwatch 2 is perhaps one of the most tragic game industry productions in history, which unfortunately killed a lot of momentum for the game. However, I would periodically revisit Overwatch on and off for years. Definitely a formative game for me. Dark Souls 3 came out just after I turned 17, and somehow it was the first Souls-like that was prominently on my radar. Naturally, the first thing that caught me off guard was the difficulty. In my experience, single-player games were not usually this hard, but I was absolutely up for the challenge. Mastering an encounter by painstakingly learning the telegraphs of each attack, then flawlessly executing my timing was extremely rewarding. It honestly kind of spoiled me on boss fights, since to this day I find I am more easily disappointed by single-player bosses that don't have as many unique attacks, stages, and even the incredible designs that were in Dark Souls 3. The next thing it helped me develop was an appreciation for the level design. Passing a locked door, then circling back to it an hour later after stumbling through a maze of dense, interconnected pathways is incredible. The world feels sprawling and vast, yet over time these shortcuts evolve the environment into a more approachable space. I have a ton of respect for these games, and I really enjoyed my time with this entry in Dark Souls. Creativity of the bosses, intelligently crafted levels, and unforgiving difficulty all make this game impactful. Next up in my single player catalog was Doom, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. What made it stand out from other games was how laser focused it was on the core purpose of its existence, which was speed and violence. Cover systems would only slow you down. Skill trees takes time away from killing. Story minimal, just kill demons. The music blaring heavy metal. It was refreshing to have a game with essentially no bloat, with attention to detail on only the aspects that would enhance the fun factor, like the glory kills, which were absolutely brutal. This might be a hot take, but my only gripe is that I think it could have been trimmed down a bit. I absolutely love when games know their philosophy and don't stray from it, but this comes with the importance of then setting the pace and length of the experience to fit. It's easy to recall having a good time with Doom, but I also remember having to push through to actually roll credits. Minor influence, I'd say. Final Fantasy 15 came out that winter, and while I had never played a Final Fantasy game before, I was definitely familiar, and it seemed like something that could be up my alley. When number 13 came out, I was just 10 years old, and 14 was an MMO, which wasn't quite my thing. As my first taste and final taste of the series, I was able to appreciate lots of what the game had to offer, but its shortcomings were apparent and didn't lead me to diving deeper into the previous titles. Playing as a party was definitely new to me, and that vibe of hanging out with the boys was one of the stronger elements. Combat was super flashy, there were some cool dungeons, and the systems between fights like cooking and fishing added some cozy atmosphere. I'm also a fan of the world aesthetic. Combining modern tech with high fantasy creates a unique series of environments. However, I remember maybe 2 story details and wasn't wowed by the depth of combat beyond the surface. If you went back to ask younger me what I thought while I was playing it, I would have no doubt told you I thought it was cool. But years later, not much has stuck with me. I still feel like there's a Final Fantasy game out there that will click with me in the future, but this wasn't the perfect match, so it's going into minor influence. I never realized how much of a gaming coward I was until Resident Evil 7. It was a famous franchise entry with decent reviews, and I hadn't played a horror game before, so I picked this up to give it a try. Immediately I started coming up with strategies to force myself into completing it, most notably inviting friends over and recording it like a let's play so I don't have the choice to stop. I suppose it's a testament to the game's success in creating an unnerving environment that I dreaded playing it so much, but also the stealth horror loop of slowly but perfectly avoiding the threat for long periods of time and being punished with a jump scare and minutes of lost progress when you don't, I just find to be really annoying more than fun. If I lose a combat challenge, I'll likely still enjoy the fight, and I'm okay with the reset, but if I have to repeat a section of sneaking from cover to cover several times, I can't think of much more unpleasant experiences. Funnily enough, certain plot points still stick out to me, and I remember that possessed rotting father chasing me through the halls vividly. So in that sense, it was definitely memorable and did a good job in teaching me what I don't enjoy playing. For Honor is a sad case of what in my eyes is a great core game that couldn't find its footing due to a lack of functional supporting systems. I found the core melee combat to be incredibly unique and also very skillful. With a mix of feint and attack options, duels felt like psychological warfare at the same time you were clashing metal. Playing with a group of friends could lead to absolutely epic fights with different fun characters to play and battlefields to stage your match. Never before had I seen a PvP game with so much depth in a fighting system centered around close quarter combat. Unfortunately, two key issues clipped its wings. A lack of incentive to play, in my eyes that would be a ranked mode, and the server stability. By now, games had trained me to expect a reward or at least clear feedback from every match with a change in skill rating. Without clear goals and progression, endlessly playing quick play was not a satisfying enough experience for me. Equally important was the server reliability. They used peer-to-peer connection, which led to frequent lag and disconnects, and that cheapened the experience, making me less likely to requeue each time it occurred. I believe this game slowly fixed its issues and gained a dedicated cult following, but it will always strongly remind me of how a game can fail to capture the attention of myself and many others with a strong foundation if the other key parts are missing. This makes it a minor influence that stays with me. In those years, I wasn't missing many PlayStation exclusives since they reliably hit a high bar in quality, and the next one up was Horizon Zero Dawn. I talk about the sequel in my tier list video from 2024, and many of my thoughts apply here. Feel free to check that out for extended commentary. But to summarize, I'll say that the combat is what drew me to this game, and it was absolutely worthy of the attention it captured. Watching huge mechanical chunks fly off robotic dinosaurs as you dash around a beautiful world is endlessly satisfying. There's a great depth to the tactics of each fight that makes gameplay immersive and rewarding. What caught me off guard was how much I would get invested into the story and the mystery it weaves into the game world. It didn't do anything insanely innovative, but I really liked it. Minor influence. My first time with a true immersive sim was Prey in the summer of 2017. This game hooked me instantly with the extremely memorable opening sequence, and then continued to click as I saw the overwhelming amount of freedom it gives the player and how they want to solve problems. In most games, a locked door means you either can't get in, or you need to find a key specifically placed as a different objective somewhere else. One obstacle, one answer. What makes Prey so successful as an immersive sim is that a locked door can be handled close to as many ways you would actually realistically think to handle it. If you're strong enough, you can kick it down. If you're smart enough, hack the terminal. More nimble, climb in through the vents. Or maybe you really did just find a key laying around. That works too. Not to mention, this game lets you unlock unique alien powers, such as turning into small objects as a mimic, another way to slip into places typically beyond your reach. And the environment you play in is just so perfectly made to make the most of these intelligent systems. Storytelling from Prey is subtle and heavily relies on you to thread together what you learned, but I found it really interesting and created a tense atmosphere. I really loved this game and thought it was super underrated. Games like this almost spoil more linear experiences when you come back to a locked door and realize there is no point in being more creative than the game needs you to be. This design philosophy definitely left an impact on me. Wolfenstein 2 was also about to release at that time, which I thought looked cool, so first I went back to play Wolfenstein The New Order, which at this point was around 3 years old. If this is one of your favorites, I'm sorry, but this game formed almost zero coherent memories in my brain as I write this. I don't remember disliking it per se, but it left a middling enough impression that I didn't follow up with the sequel as planned. What I do remember though is a few absolutely over-the-top absurd moments of gory sci-fi which were cool. Also, in general, I think the premise is neat of being an alternate world timeline where Nazis won and society is full of disturbing propaganda and crazy technology. Maybe the gameplay just didn't grab me, I honestly can't remember, but that's I guess the whole point of ranking on nostalgia, so it's replaceable. If Just Cause 3 wasn't free for PS Plus members in August 2017, I wouldn't have played it. But it was, so I did. I cannot recall a single detail from the story, and the gunplay was underwhelming. However, credit where it's due, the sandbox for chaos and destruction was a lot of fun for a couple weeks. The game really knows where it shines and leans into it, giving you a grappling hook, wingsuit, and parachute to zoom around the map in a flow state. You can use the grappling hook to tether two objects together, and use C4s, RPGs, and various equipment to cause explosions and send debris flying everywhere. Just Cause 3 is not a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, but it's undeniably enjoyable to blow stuff up. I checked Steam and somehow it has 500 recent reviews sitting at very positive, with over 1,000 people still playing it. So hey, maybe it holds up. Very close to replaceable, but the chaos and movement was memorable, so I'll balance it out to a minor influence. To this day, I don't know what spirit of indie games possessed me to buy Ori and the Blind Forest, but I'm happy it did, as this was another crack in my AAA armor. It's hard to not first notice the beautiful painterly art style when you begin playing Ori. The sprawling Metroidvania setting is mystical and rich with detail. I particularly love the color palette and the use of light. Every setting has backdrops that extend into the horizon with gently blurred silhouettes, and cool glowing tones that complement the environment. When I played this game, I had been doing 3D art for 2 years, and was about to start a college program to further my education on this topic. Most games I played had art quality above what I could make myself as a student, yet I more or less understood the methods. With Ori, I remember being quite puzzled as to how they even pulled off such a unique look. The map itself was also a new concept to me, since I hadn't played a Metroidvania game before. It was lots of fun to explore this dangerous forest and its unique biomes, while slowly building up an arsenal of abilities to help me reach new areas and fight more effectively. The story is simple and subtle, yet the use of music and cinematic animations were extremely impactful relative to their screen time, invoking strong emotions for these creatures in the woods. Memorable action set pieces and satisfying difficulty also added to the enjoyment of Ori. This is a wonderful game that still holds up today. I know people who have played it recently and still had a great time. So many aspects of Ori stick out to me in positive ways that I would say it was impactful. When I started college, my friend group from high school became geographically distanced, which meant the best way to stay in touch easily was with video games. Because of this, my game consumption started skewing more heavily towards trendy multiplayer games, leaving time for just a few heavy-hitter single-player experiences on the side. I like to think that during my program I was a decent student, but at no point was this more at risk than the release of Monster Hunter World. Destiny 2 had just released a few months prior, and the content was thinned out and simplified as the result of some controversial design decisions that would become undone over the years. It was a prime opening for a game with great loot systems to steal its spot in my rotation. The gear system is really satisfying, and like most aspects of gameplay, very well integrated into the player fantasy of being a monster hunter. If you're farming a bear monster, it's dropping fur and claws, which you can use to create a set of armor that closely resembles the likeness of that creature. Slaying dragons rewards you with scales to craft your own set of reptilian protection. There were so many parallel modes of progression for items that it felt like farming for that 10% rare drop I needed was never a waste of time, since every failed attempt would at least send me back to camp with other materials I could make use of. Perks on armor led to lots of build crafting opportunities as well, which meant many different ways to play. That brings me to the next aspect which I loved, and that is the variety of weapons. Each class is so well balanced and designed that the same events would usually play out as follows. I would try a new weapon for the hunt, think it's underpowered. Take time to learn it, it becomes a new favorite. Getting more experience with each of the 14 weapon classes felt like learning a new game, since many of them have smaller mechanics integrated into their flow of combat. Once you finally master one, pulling off complex combos is satisfying every time. Take for example the Charge Blade, a personal favorite of mine. It starts as a sword and shield that lets you attack more quickly to generate energy for the weapon. You store this energy into files, then stack the shield on top of the sword, converting it into a huge axe to unload these files of energy as explosive extra damage. I actually made many of these same points in my tier list video from 2025 where I reviewed Monster Hunter Wilds, so feel free to check that out for more thoughts. Lastly, I'll touch on the monsters since I would be doing a disservice if I didn't. In Dark Souls, usually the process of fighting a boss is dying a few times until you beat it, and then of course you can't fight it again. In Monster Hunter, you get to experience what it's like going back for more, getting better and better, then finding it in a new location, maybe fighting 2 bosses at once. You get to really push the limits of the skill ceiling, which can be very rewarding. These monsters have fantastic designs, both aesthetically and through combat. Fighting huge spiders feel like how you imagine it would, which is very different from something closer to a crocodile. In a period of time where I was developing my introspective thoughts on why I liked or disliked aspects of games, this helped set a clear example of loot systems done well, which was in stark contrast to other games I was playing. I believe this was impactful for me. I'm grateful to PS Plus for putting so many unique indie games on their free monthly program, otherwise these would have been flying completely under my radar. In February of 2018, the game available to download was Rime, and it's always stuck with me for being one of the first experiences I had that was very centered on its atmosphere. Years later, I hardly remember the puzzle mechanics, but I can recall the art, the music, the ending, and how it all made me feel. All these components I mentioned are great, and I would imagine they still hold up well today. For me, this was unique because I'd never played a game that I enjoyed so much just from its artistic merit and emotional vibes, so that was pretty cool. Rime definitely widened my lens of how I view games, which earns it a spot in Impactful. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, next up was Fortnite. I mentioned in the intro section that this era was multiplayer focused, and aside from Destiny and Monster Hunter, during that period of time, this meant battle royales. Back in my Minecraft days, I messed around with survival games and had fun with that concept, but this was my first time diving headfirst out the battle bus day after day. It was a great formula for fun since every match unfolds differently with an almost story-like quality to it. Some games we drop tilted towers and the circle closes in on us, pure carnage start to end. Other games we drop in a remote location, sneaking our way in, playing it more safely. The sandbox also allowed for goofy strategies like building a sky base, hoping we can go undetected at the top of the map for as long as possible. Building in general was such an exciting innovation in a shooter, and I don't think the developers themselves could have even anticipated how insane people would become with this mechanic. Now it's hard to compete unless you're under the age of 10 and grew up cranking 90s, but at the beginning it was lots of fun to set up your own high ground on the fly mid-fight, gaining the advantage over unsuspecting opponents. Winning a match of Call of Duty feels good, but going into it, you know you have a 50% chance of being the victor. In Fortnite, a victory royale meant you were number one amongst 100 players, and that high was an unmatched thrill. The battle pass was cheap and fair, making it so that if you completed it, you had enough to buy the next one forever. And you could tell how much people played based on how early in the season they had the skins unlocked, which served as a badge of dedication. I don't know if Fortnite specifically did anything so insane that I would call it impactful for me personally, since most other battle royales did the same thing, but it was definitely ahead of the curve, and for me, a very memorable time. Based on my completion of nearly every Sony first-party game till now, I'm sure you saw this one coming, the God of War reboot in 2018. I never played the original games, but it felt to me as though someone played The Last of Us and thought, what if we made this into that? And to me, it worked absolutely perfectly. The closer third-person camera for combat, cinematic linear storytelling, and emotional core with a focus on parental themes all felt familiar, but I was not complaining at all. One of the ways it branches off drastically is the mythological setting of Midgard, with snowy forests, giant temples, and ancient ruins. I was particularly blown away by the scale of the creatures, which have these long-lasting impressions on me from action set pieces and even just their passive presence in the environments. The fidelity of the art was beautiful, raising the standard for realistic style environments in the industry even further. Combat felt meaty, and swinging around your axe with a personally tuned collection of runic powers was a fun way to express your own style of fighting. The music is very strong, storytelling weaves high fantasy well with grounded relationships, and the one-shot camera for the entirety of the game is a very impressive trick. I talk more about the sequel Ragnarok in my tier list video from 2023 if you'd like to hear more in-depth thoughts on the series. If we're talking quality, this game was easily A or S, but at this point, in terms of impact, it felt a bit too familiar to change how I viewed and played games moving forward, so minor influence it will go. When I was around 11, I have memories of my dad playing Red Dead Redemption, but in disconnected fragments, and I was not yet up to the task of playing it completely by myself. Despite that, I was familiar enough with the rough story beats, and having loved GTA 5, was very excited for Rockstar's sequel in Red Dead Redemption 2. A game of this scope probably deserves a full video essay, but I'll try to do it justice in a limited time. First, on the technical front, this was one of the most lived-in worlds I ever had the joy of exploring. The level of detail for the routine of every NPC is downright ridiculous, to the point where 7 years later, open world games are coming out and still being outdone by RDR2. If you follow the activities of a random man, you find that he may sleep in a room above a local bar until he starts his day waking up at 8 AM. He walks to his job where he begins working the fields for a couple hours, then moves bags of feed for the sheep and breaks for lunch. After the workday is complete, you find him having a drink at the bar before heading to bed. These believable flows of human behavior permeate into all the characters around you, which makes the world feel so real. Another fantastic fantastic example is houses being built over the course of the game. Depending on when you visit them during the story, you may see a foundation, then partially built, then fully painted, which contributes to the feeling that this world is not just alive, but time is passing and things are changing, which happens to be a central theme as well. Mud sticks to your clothes, weapons need to be cleaned, beards grow over time, and your horse's testicles contract or expand based on the temperature of your region. The focus on realism is completely obsessive, and many mechanics slow the pace of the game, which isn't for everyone. GTA is about racing through the city, experiencing the most exciting parts of a series of missions. Red Dead Redemption is about immersing yourself in living life inside this old western world and feeling the melancholic end of the outlaw lifestyle. It's when you're doing chores like chopping wood, fishing, or riding your horse to town that you have to sit with this atmosphere. Arthur Morgan is the perfect protagonist to experience this through. He truly changes as a man throughout our journey with him, and it happens gradually. It's impossible not to grow emotionally attached to the characters you spend so much time with, and this slow burn can lead to very resonant payoffs. Red Dead Redemption 2 was very ambitious and intentional with its design, knowingly creating a divisive effect since many who came expecting Grand Theft Auto in the Wild West were a little let down. Yet to me, this was an impactful experience, changing how I view storytelling and open worlds in video games. In this period of time, I loved looter shooters. I was becoming increasingly disillusioned with the direction of Destiny and had such positive experiences with other games like Monster Hunter. This perfect storm led me to pre-ordering Anthem. To start with some positives, I actually think the gameplay was decently strong and stood apart from competitors in the space. The Iron Man power fantasy included a great sense of aerial movement, as well as a wide kit of chaining mechanical abilities like raining down missiles on your enemies. Unfortunately, similar to For Honor, this game was a brutal reality check that fun gameplay without supporting systems is often not enough to survive on its own. Looting wasn't interesting enough, and the mission structure was repetitive and shallow. I lost interest pretty quickly in favor of other multiplayer games, so I can't speak with too much authority on much else the game had to offer. Replaceable. As the enthusiasm for Fortnite wavered, Apex Legends was ready to take its spot. Even though building was a great addition, I never loved the feel of weapons or movement in Fortnite, so I immediately gravitated towards Apex's more snappy, tactile first-person shooter feel and its quick, fluid traversal mechanics. With my history of Overwatch, the role-based kits added a fun bit of specializations so you could synergize with teammates, which I'm a total sucker for. Beyond that, the Battle Royale genre inherently comes with all the parts that made it fun, and I talked about it previously. I really liked Apex Legends, easily A tier for quality, but in terms of impact or influence on me personally, I feel like I could have played any other strong BR in its spot, so it's replaceable. Spider-Man was one that didn't really grab me at launch, but a friend recommended it and lent me the disc in the following year. To me, this was like the video game equivalent of a Marvel movie in all the good ways. If a superhero game as Spider-Man sounds fun to you, then you will no doubt enjoy this game. Web swinging feels great, and its methods of movement encourage building up an enjoyable rhythm. It's always a great signal from a game's movement and world when you'd rather get there yourself than use fast travel, and the city is perfectly made with this flying around in mind. Combat feels familiar since it heavily borrows from the Arkham formula, but adds an extra flair of acrobatics and web gadgets to make it work for this hero. Story-wise, there's iconic villains and big action scenes, but a choice I particularly liked was putting us in the role of a more experienced Peter Parker, instead of resetting us to his teenage years like most other franchises. But praise aside, I really don't remember any plot points too well, and besides nailing what it wanted to be, this wasn't anything too special for me. I'd already played fantastic superhero games, open world games, and everything else this was going for. I wasn't particularly moved on an emotional level that stayed with me either. Not a knock at Spider-Man at all, again, the quality was high, but for my catalog, I'd have to say it was replaceable. On a whim, I bought Overcooked to have a new casual couch co-op game when I see friends in person. Super fun game, perfect for the role I wanted to fill. A lot of co-op experiences are made to work as single-player games first, or in addition to playing with others. Monster Hunter and Destiny to me work best with friends, but you can absolutely do missions by yourself. In Overcooked, it's ground up made to be a cooperative arcade game where working together is the main mechanic and source of fun. Any game that demands constant and precise communication immediately increases the fun factor in my eyes, since those social dynamics add a ton of enjoyment. A game where every level is a small kitchen you cook in sounds simple, and it is, but the game pushes for a lot of depth and makes it the best experience it can be. All that praise aside, it didn't convert me into some huge party game consumer, and I wouldn't exactly say it's one you can't miss. So, just minor influence. And the last game to wrap up this era was Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. To me, this is one of those games that barely does anything new and leaves almost no formed memories in my brain 5 years later. It absolutely reaches a high bar of quality in all aspects of an action-adventure game, and if you like those, you'll probably like this one as well, just as I did when I played it. If you're a fan of the franchise, your enjoyment will be elevated. Jedi combat was cool, exploring planets was neat, and your little droid as helpful as a Star Wars droid should be. Where Spider-Man was a superhero skin on an open world action game, this is a Star Wars skin on an action-adventure game. It felt too familiar and did not move me forward in my shaping as a player, making it land irreplaceable. This next era I'm calling the experimental stage, not necessarily because the games themselves are super experimental, but rather I was experimenting more with my selection of games. I played some older classics, tried out franchises I had missed, and also dove into genres I was less familiar with. Of course, no stage is purely defined by one characteristic, so I still found time for a couple big hits as well that fall right into my typical range. I happened to catch a stream near the end of 2019 where the streamer was playing We Were Here Together with a Friend. This two-player puzzle game immediately reminded me of Portal 2 and how much I loved that when I was younger. I quickly convinced a friend to get it and we started to play. I reviewed the latest entry in my 2025 tier list if you'd like to hear more thoughts on the franchise there, but in general I think these games are really great. Smart puzzle design is something that endlessly impresses me, and that effect only multiplies when done in co-op. Balancing the flow of information to feel fair yet challenging must be tricky, but they always pull it off brilliantly in a never-ending range of creative new problems to work through together. I've since played every game in the franchise, and my friend and I are always eager for the next entry. It's reignited my love for co-op puzzle games, and I try to always make room for a couple of these each year. Memorable. Next up was Stardew Valley, and after 250 hours of game time, single player and multiplayer farms, even going to see the live orchestra performing the soundtrack, I can confidently say how much of a gem this game is. It's overflowing with charm and relaxing vibes. Beautiful art, serene music, and likable characters all play their part to make you feel instantly at home in Pelican Town. Each change of season comes with a distinct shift in the color palette and a sense of forward progress, as you complete a never-ending checklist of activities available to you. It's a casual game for sure, but each casual system has enough depth to be enjoyable for many hours and sink into that role. Catching the legend fish on a rainy day can be a memorable experience, but equally as satisfying is waking up to a full harvest of ancient fruit. There are so many parallel tracks of progression that you feel as though you can always be moving the needle forward on many fronts in one day. The morning may start with delivering gifts to your marriage prospects in the town, then a drop off for new bundles at the community center. Now the busy work is done, hit the mines to gather ore for your next tool upgrade. And finally, once night falls, new fish are available, so you rush to the ocean to try your luck in catching a super cucumber, only available from the ocean after 6 p.m. in the spring or fall. Being dropped into this world brimming with places to explore and people to meet leads to such satisfying feeling of mastery as you learn every rich detail in the world. There are in fact many more tricky and rewarding secrets below the surface if you're paying attention, or reading the wiki. It gives you the room to play at your own pace as well. If you want to go super hard, you can memorize the most cost-effective crops, festival dates, and let everything fall in place for the quickest progression, but you can just as easily make up missed milestones in the following year. The game structure of progressing and saving day by day is extremely addicting and absolutely gives that constant one more day effect. Lastly, the capacity for designing your own farm with both functional and decorative items is amazing. After thinking my farm looked okay, I made the mistake of checking out other people's designs on the subreddit and was blown away by the variety and creativity for different layouts. If you haven't played it, you definitely should. I think this is a game basically anyone could enjoy, and it works really well in co-op. As far as influence goes, I came away from Stardew Valley with a heightened appreciation and interest for 2D games, pixel art games, and also just games with a mechanic involving farming and expanding a line of production. I also played it with my family, my friends, and started a world with my girlfriend after maybe our 4th date. A bold move that paid off. Impactful for sure. Thank you Sony for another free indie banger on PSN. Journey was available to download in April of 2020, and this game was unlike anything I'd played before. It has very minimal traditional mechanics for its 3-hour runtime, as you mainly just walk, jump, and glide your way towards a mountaintop. It is a purely atmospheric experience that is completely stunning in all aspects. The music is not just technically phenomenal, but its usage to complement the gameplay as an emotional journey fits so well. It will rise or soften relying on moments of discovery or sadness, and it was the first soundtrack of a video game to be Grammy nominated. The environments have a huge sense of scale, making you feel tiny and in awe of the surrounding structures. The minimalism of the gameplay allows you to focus on absorbing these feelings from the world and its sounds, which is such a smart choice. Beautiful game, basically an art piece, and while I'd had similar experiences in the past like Rime, Journey was the first for me to commit so completely to a singular vision and pull it off with undeniable success. Impactful. I must have been budgeting at the time because another free PS Plus game that caught my eye randomly was Shadow of the Colossus Remake. When I played Dark Souls 3, I remember having a specific thought. The bosses are the most fun part of this game, and running back to them can sometimes just be plain frustrating. How cool would it be if I could play a game with just the bosses? For Dark Souls, this thought is perhaps quite shallow, as removing all the enemies between would mean no reason for its great level design and might break the pacing. Yet when I heard Shadow of the Colossus is a game featuring 16 unique bosses and no other combat, I was intrigued. The feeling I had while playing this game is unlike anything I'd felt before. You ride your horse through a world that is vast and empty, the opposite of what you'd expect from most games. Passing ruined temples, vacant fields, uninhabited forests, with nothing but time to think about why you are on this mission. Audio is quite subdued as well. Long stretches without music, only the sound of hoofbeats in the wind. It feels like the world is rich with mystery, and much time has passed before you, creating quite a striking atmosphere. When your targets first appear in your sight, it's often unforgettable. The Colossus creatures are staggeringly massive and intimidating, each with an entirely different approach necessary to kill. Boss fights also work as a contained story of experimentation and discovery, leading to extremely satisfying victories when the puzzle is solved and your execution is pulled off mechanically. Near the beginning of the game, you are given a very simple motivation. You would like to bring someone you care for back to life, and to do so, you must kill the 16 Colossi. And yet, your pursuit morphs from heroic to tragic before your eyes, since these creatures don't feel evil. They are majestic and solitary, and as the game continues, this moral tension only intensifies. The way this game makes you feel so strongly with such few elements is masterfully effective. I loved this game, and it was definitely memorable. Right in line with what you'd expect by now, I played The Last of Us 2 on release since I was super excited, given the stellar track record of Naughty Dog. All my technical praise from the first game applies here, from the art to the combat, and of course the cinematic qualities. The only thing worth sharing my opinion on here is the story, since that seemed to be divisive, and personally, I loved it. I can understand why people would be put off, since it strongly departs from the first game's story and asks you to connect with new characters, but as someone so fascinated by perspective and morality, it was deeply interesting and entertaining to me. If anything, I believe it's a necessary extension following the actions of your protagonist in the first game. You know there are morally gray areas, but now it's time to pay the price and reflect on how it impacts others. By the end, there are characters pitted against each other, and I feel nothing but pity for both of them, making it so hard to watch every bit of pain that is inflicted, regardless of the target. Extremely emotionally riveting for me, and I can recall specific sequences moving me deeply and staying with me. Beyond just perfecting the linear survival action genre another 15% in the gameplay, the ambitious storytelling structure was what made this game so memorable to me. My next game was motivated by a few factors. A big franchise I'd always heard praise for and never tried, looking for a co-op game to play with my friends since we had fun with We Were Here and just wanted something else to play together, and perhaps most importantly, a deep Steam sale. So with that, I started Far Cry 5. From the lens of an open world sandbox, lots of fun to be had. Small town America makes for a unique setting to explore, and the cult aspect worked decently well. I enjoyed the themes of unsettling sermons and psychological brainwashing, but I'm a sucker for those sort of narrative devices. Beyond that, I don't really remember much. I played in co-op, which can make me less attentive to detail, but I cannot recall the name of a single character, how the gunplay felt, or really anything else super memorable. I think it's somewhat rare to have an open world Ubisoft style game with true seamless co-op, so that to me was the strongest pull, setting the stage for casually cruising around and wiping out cult settlements. However, I think the same could have been done with any other similar game, so I'll be leaving it in replaceable. Inspired by how much I enjoyed the Shadow of the Colossus remake, I looked to other popular remakes that could give me an opportunity to experience old classics. At this time, I was also shifting more and more towards PC gaming and away from consoles, so the natural choice was Black Mesa, a reimagining of Half-Life 1. I immediately followed it with Half-Life 2, so my feelings kind of blurred together, and I'll give them both a shared section. One key characteristic that makes these games so immersive and unique is that you never leave the first-person perspective. Most linear shooters will break away to pre-rendered cutscenes or in in-engine animations, but having this continuity of never leaving Gordon Freeman's eyes was a really distinct stylistic choice. In Black Mesa, you start with just another day at the lab, fit with a mundane tram ride and casually chatting employees. After a catastrophic incident, the game begins a slow burn escalation of mystery and cosmic horror that is absolutely gripping. You cannot believe your eyes as you endlessly journey through this sprawling research facility and uncover new secrets about the environment and the incident until a very memorable finale. And one prominent aspect that stuck with me across both games was the use of level design to create puzzles of physical space. Intricate platforming, finding the vent opening, or restoring power to ride an elevator all rewarded careful observation and exploration of each setting. The gunplay does not quite live up to modern standards, as the AI are sporadic and guns don't feel super great to use. However, I found myself really not minding this in light of the other positive aspects of the game. In Half-Life 2, it improves on itself with even better pacing, variety, and atmosphere. Many more unique areas and large-scale narrative implications following the events of the first game. More physical puzzles, this time adding in some physics elements as well. The world building and environments work together to create a fantastically memorable story and setting that I was thoroughly enjoying 16 years after their release. This was a really neat experience for me because I got to appreciate and understand the influence this game had from years before I even started playing games, but also learned that old doesn't always equal worse. Sure, the graphical fidelity and technical gunplay have been far outdone in the modern day, yet how important is that for fun and immersion? I still really enjoyed my time with these games because their other timeless strengths were so prominent, and that was really eye-opening to me. So I have to put it in impactful. Bouncing back to a game absolutely predictable and in my wheelhouse, which is Cyberpunk 2077. I love The Witcher, so this was a no-brainer for me to pick up. I played this on a powerful PC, so my experience differed from a lot of players who had fair criticisms of the game's technical state at launch. I want to acknowledge those, but say that it barely affected me, and I only remember a single side quest where an NPC got stuck and I was able to easily reset it successfully, only losing a few minutes of progress. To me, what I mainly remember is the art of the world, making it feel like a real city with so much unique character to it, a cool sci-fi story with great side quests to complement it, and a freedom of RPG build diversity I hadn't felt since Skyrim. The different districts of the city felt very unique to explore, but the main urban hub was so dense and layered, making for really interesting designs and believable layouts. It's super grimy, very neon, it makes great use of soaring verticality. Similar to The Witcher, side quests had a habit of snowballing into adventures, even more emotionally riveting and entertaining than the main questline at times. There were interesting characters that each lent a new perspective on this world too, and while I don't remember the gameplay being perhaps the most perfectly polished experience at launch, I still enjoyed the different achievable player fantasies and how well they fit into the setting. You could fully spec into becoming a netrunner, using cybernetic neural implants to hack systems and people, more of a stealthy tech approach to combat. Another option is leaning into the heavy Japanese influence on the cyberpunk aesthetic by rocking with nothing but katanas. At one point, I got completely distracted by a side quest where you competed in brawls limited to bare hand melee, so I spent 5 hours refining a one-punch man setup. Each was fun and dramatically changed the flow of fights. The noticeable weaknesses that stood out to me were the AI behavior, the progression, and in general some immersive secondary details to the world. For AI behavior, pedestrians never wowed me in their responses and seemed more stiff and repetitive in their motions than I would have liked. Skill tree progression was not especially interesting or memorable in its design. And for secondary world details, it's a trickier critique because it's less so what was wrong, but rather what they could have done to add flavor. Luckily for me, I don't have to think of ideas myself because since launch they've added a ton of these sorts of things, such as customizable apartments, arcade games, more cosmetic choices, and expanded functionality for vehicles. In open world games striving to be immersive, these things can really add up and make the environment come to life. In Witcher 3, one of these prominent factors was a game like Gwent. We're nearing the end of the list, which means it's increasingly difficult for games to leave an impact on me since each new experience makes up a smaller total percentage of my playtime than the one before it. It's like a reverse recency bias since it only gets harder to do something new. But I really liked Cyberpunk and actually want to revisit it since I never played the expansion. That being said, nothing insanely impactful on me from launch, so just a minor influence. The Half-Life games left a positive impression on me, and virtual reality was starting to gain traction, so I bought an Oculus Rift with the primary intention of playing Half-Life Alyx. I only played maybe 3 VR games total, making this easily the least cost-effective console hardware I'd ever purchased. Virtual reality in general also seemed to slowly fizzle out and not get many notable popular releases in the future. However, Half-Life Alyx to this day remains quite possibly the most immersive experience I've ever had in video games or any form of media. I was reading a book recently called How Games games move us, and it discusses how while movies can make us feel sad or happy, they lack the personal attachment to invoke feelings of guilt or pride. While our conscious brain understands that what we are seeing is not real, there are still parts of us that are tricked. This is why when a film shows a close-up of a mother crying, we feel sad. It's also why in a video game when you kill a dog, you feel guilty. Games give you agency and enhanced physicality that can fool more bodily circuits into believing what's happening is really happening to you. Since you can choose to go left or right in a fight, that's already more connection to the character than in a passive story. Sometimes a controller will vibrate as you're knocked back, or you're really pulling a trigger when you fire a gun. Now imagine all of this times 10. It's truly hard to explain without having someone experience it themselves, but the feeling of squatting down to duck behind cover as you physically reach over your shoulder to grab a new magazine of ammunition, then inserting it into your weapon and cocking it ready is by itself one of the most satisfying actions I've performed in a video game. This is not at all to say that all VR games feel this good, but Valve's attention to detail and effort into making simple mechanics satisfying is phenomenal. I didn't get tired of shooting or movement in the entire 12-ish hours it took me to play this game. The environments are fantastic too, much more realistic than any other game I've seen in this medium, and the story is more of the same high praise I gave to the last two entries, a fantastic expansion of the world's lore and storytelling. It's a masterpiece without a doubt, and a shame how few people will get to play it because of the upfront investment in niche hardware. However, as I write this, I have not turned on my Oculus in over 3 years, and I doubt I ever will again. In addition, it's not like I wasn't already a fan of linear action sci-fi, but because of the uniqueness of the medium, I felt like I discovered new limits of gaming and creative applications of digital worlds, so I'll say memorable. In my final era for this video, the scales finally tipped towards more indie than AAA. I've listed over 65 games in my video this far, and at some point playing a decent 7 out of 10 open world action game or linear story shooter isn't that novel anymore. What I find myself increasingly drawn to is experiencing innovative ideas and playing games with creative gameplay loops totally unfamiliar to me. Of course, there are still big budget studios making games worth playing, but the ability to iterate and take experimental risks is just easier when you're a small group of people. So let's check out some of what that new criteria had in store for me. It's possible to beat Outer Wilds in just 7 minutes. However, for most players, it will take closer to 20 hours. The meme for this game is that you just have to play it. I can't tell you anything about it, but just trust me bro, you gotta play it. And it's pretty true that the less you know about this game going into it, the more special your experience will be. I went in completely blind, and it's led to some of the most memorable moments in my life of playing video games. The music ranges from atmospheric to acoustic earworms, the art is timelessly stylized, the sense of scale in the exploration makes you feel tiny. Physics are rewarding to master, and the hunt for more knowledge to solve this game's mysteries is unlike anything I've played before. The uniqueness of this game shifted my entire perspective on video games into more eagerly searching for fresh mechanics. Formative. Based on the history of games I had enjoyed, I knew that I liked grindy incremental progression systems, but with Satisfactory, I learned how much I love those aspects wrapped in a factory builder setting that lets you creatively optimize and design lines of production. This game is so perfect in its rollout of new mechanics, quality of life features, and scale of production that playing it first almost ruined every other factory builder I would try after it. Gathering resources and then creating a perfectly balanced flow of consumption through a series of machines is so satisfying. It's one thing to get your new resources being made, and it's another to see the conveyor belts never get backed up because you're splitting the ingredients exactly how you need to. The map is fun to explore, and the size of your factories continues to grow massively as you expand into new interesting regions and biomes. If this game dropped you in with access to all its systems and machines immediately, it would be extremely overwhelming, yet it masterfully steps you through the complexity and stays interesting and addictive the whole time. This method of game design and the precise niche of factory building were new to me, and quite impactful. I was starting to jump between games more quickly, and that included multiplayer games with friends. So when I saw a streamer playing Raft, I thought it looked cool and picked it up with a group. It has a really fun and unique twist on classic survival games, where instead of going out exploring for resources then returning to your base, you explore with your base, as it drifts around the water and you collect the trash you see floating around you. Or you bump into small islands randomly to scour them for anything useful before you continue drifting away. With what you gather, you can expand your raft over time from a tiny and frightening plank of wood wood to a massive barge with gardens, kitchens, sails, and more. That core gameplay loop is already a lot of fun, and then on top of that it adds a narrative structure of pulling you between main islands that are heavier on puzzles and combat. Each of these new locations was a joy to explore and work through with my friends. At this point, besides Minecraft, I hadn't really played many co-op survival games, and this very positive experience would absolutely influence me to start playing more in the future, like Valheim, Enshrouded, Abiotic Factor, and more. Because of that, I'll say it was impactful. Despite being in the indie-heavy era, it was impossible to not be drawn in by the allure of Elden Ring. The reviews, sales, and overall buzz surrounding this game was incredibly positive, and the open-world approach seemed like a cool direction to take the series. I really liked this game, but after about 40 hours, I actually stopped playing for reasons I'll get into. Most of what I praised in my section on Dark Souls 3 earlier can apply here. The boss design is fantastic, combat feels great, and the aesthetic of the world is super awesome. What stands out particularly in Elden Ring is that the open-world design is really refreshing in its lack of checklists and handholding, instead heavily rewarding curiosity and turning every branching path into a huge adventure. I was constantly surprised to find massive new sections of the world tucked away behind unassuming caves or simple elevators. Finding Siofra with its glowing starry sky amidst the underground ruins is a moment I'll never forget. However, when I got this game, I was 6 months into a new job and as busy as I could be. Gone were the days of coming home from school by 3:45 with nothing but the open evening for games. There was one night where I wrapped up a late work meeting around 8 p.m. and with just 45 minutes of free time, I fought the same boss for the entire duration, then closed the game having made zero progress. Likely just a skill issue, but it was an absolutely crushing feeling that provided no comfort or enjoyment after a long draining day. So while I absolutely can acknowledge this game is fantastic and even love much of my time with it, at that moment it simply did not fit what I wanted from video games. There are still other FromSoft games high on my wish list like Sekiro, but I felt as though I'd played great Souls-like experiences and great open world experiences before. Unfortunately, this game was a slap in the face of my shifting interests and free time that I undoubtedly would have fully completed years prior, and maybe I still will go back and do a fresh run in the future. Without a knock to its quality, I'll put it down as minor influence. Switching directions entirely, I next played Unrailed, which is a casual co-op arcade game where you must keep your train on the tracks through procedurally generated levels. Really fun and similar to what I enjoyed from Overcooked in the way it forces great communication and frantic teamwork. Well designed, cute art, and lots of replayability. However, at this point, I knew I liked these type of games, and I'm sure others could have more or less filled that same spot for the brief time I played it, so I'll say replaceable. And finally, the very last games I would play and not officially review on my channel were Little Nightmares 1 and 2. These games are absolute masterpieces on all fronts. The atmosphere of the environments is so effectively unsettling, and the designs of malicious creatures so disgusting and unnerving that you feel constant tension navigating this world. Sound design aids this with its creaky floorboards, loud humming lights, or even just the smart use of pure silence. Monsters and their set pieces are hauntingly memorable, and the pathing you must discover to make quick escapes leads to fun, precise mechanical execution, or light puzzle solving. This game makes you feel like helpless prey in a twisted world. But one thing that absolutely stunned me was how effective the narrative development and reveals are. There is exceptional lore, world building, and story moments that took me by surprise. I talked earlier about how much I don't like playing horror games in the Resident Evil section, and I don't know why, but the 2D format just made it much more palatable to me. With no clear dialogue or exposition, this series was still able to tell a riveting story which stuck with me. But at the same time, I wouldn't go on to play a lot of horror games or puzzle platformer style games, so I'll say it was memorable. With my script complete, I realized or was reminded by others of games I completely forgot to add. My process for this was a combination of memory and a digital history of purchases attached to my Steam or PSN counts. I figured if I could not remember it in my initial pass, it probably wasn't formative enough to be worthy of a section in the video. So I'll speedrun through the leftovers here. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets was a clunky PC game my dad would sometimes play, and my only clear memory is that you could trade wizard cards with other players in the school while they said funny lines. For a brief period, I was hooked on the NHL games and Ultimate Team, spending money on microtransactions to open packs of cards. Eventually, I realized how much of a scam it is that they release the same game with a 5% difference every year for 80 Canadian dollars, needing to rebuild your Ultimate Team from scratch once again. Lego Star Wars was actually really fun, and I'm not sure how I forgot this one. These games are simple, but the parody aspect aspect is entertaining, and the light mechanics make it a good kids game, I think. Can't remember too much. I played New Super Mario Bros. Wii with my family, and I think it was fun, but also overshadowed by Mario Galaxy for me because I thought the 3D aspect was cooler. Guitar Hero was actually a really neat innovation because the physical connection to the game action was so strong. A similar feeling to some of what I described in my VR section. When I got good at that game, I was convinced I could play the guitar. It also showed me a lot of cool older music, and the social party aspect was great because you played short rounds and it was fun to watch or listen to the songs. Blur was a racing game I played on PS3 that was actually pretty great. The art style kind of still makes it look good, and the feel of racing and power-ups was really solid. Rocket League I've been playing on and off for about 7 years, and it's one of my favorite games for what it does. I find that a lot of competitive PvP games can be unfun to lose. When I get steamrolled in a match of Marvel Rivals, I don't feel like I enjoyed my time. Rocket League is one of those few games where I can play just 3 matches a week, every week for years, and regardless of winning or losing, always just enjoy it. The physics of the ball and car movement leads to endless fun moments and expression of skill. I'm forever hard stuck at my current rank, but I don't even mind. However, I play nothing else like this and barely think about the game itself critically, which is probably why I forgot it on this list. I've never spent $1 on it, I never play any game modes other than 2v2 or 3v3 ranked, and I don't keep up to date with any changes across seasons, so it feels weird to rank its impact or review it. I played Among Us constantly for about a month during peak COVID, and learned that I absolutely love social deduction games. Any board games or video games that follow this formula of lying to your friends is immediately fun to me. In real life, I'm pretty forward with everything I'm thinking, so it's a nice little escape to get out my deceptive urges. Also, playing with close friends can be so funny as the accusations fly wildly. When I got my Oculus, I got Beat Saber and Superhot in addition to Half-Life Alyx. Beat Saber was really fun and skillful, same feelings as Guitar Hero, but on the next level. Played a bunch of this, but it's pretty one note, so I burnt out after a couple weeks. Superhot VR is really genius, immersive, and you have to be creative as it's quite challenging to find the best way to win each level. It's a really fun and unique concept too. Phasmophobia I played and really didn't like. It felt buggy, unpolished, and didn't have a lot of depth. Most matches were frustrating, aimless, no meaningful progression between runs, and unfairly getting one shot by the creatures. Might be an outlier because people love that game, but I think it was just because of the novel idea with some new mechanics like saying the ghost's name out loud and that sort of thing. But really not for me. I found it pretty shallow and repetitive. Looking over my final tier list, I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. Focusing on the higher tiers, I would say that definitely gives an accurate representation of my taste in games and my most memorable experiences growing up in the lens of video game consumption. I hope people don't just skip here and assume this is a proxy for quality, because through that perspective, I would absolutely recommend something like God of War over going back to play Uncharted 1. Also, Unrailed would definitely be higher. Great game, just not particularly influential to me. I think the one game that stands out to me as being misplaced is Club Penguin. The script was very early when I placed it in Memorable as a product of grouping it with Runescape as multiplayer browser games. To me, it fits much better with the games and minor influence. I'm also quite happy with the distribution. When I see tier lists that skew too heavily towards the top or bottom, I'm skeptical of the reviewer's ability to fairly judge whatever they are ranking. Formative should be the hardest rank to achieve, so it makes sense that it's the category with the least games. Thanks for sticking with me, or skipping here. The purpose of this was to fondly reminisce over games of the previous decades and evaluate how well your taste aligns with mine, so you can have a better point of reference for using my other reviews. Also, maybe this encouraged you to check out a release you missed, but looks like a perfect fit for you. It was a lot of fun for me to make this video, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.